remain sane in an insane world to keep making these gaffes.
Yeah. I think we are live now.
Okay. Welcome to this somewhat unusual book event. My role, happily, is a modest one. I have to introduce two very distinguished persons. And in doing so, I'm reminding myself not to make the gaffe that someone made when they introduced J.R.D. Tata many years ago, and I was in the audience. Since Mr. Tata was a very distinguished man, well-known person, famous, much like my two participants, the person who was introducing them said, "Oh, well, he's so well known that I don't have to say much about them." Instead of saying that, what came out was the less said about him, the better. So I'm not going to do the less said about Gopal and Janki. So here goes. The hero of the show today is Janki Santoke, and she is Dr. Janki Santoke holds a doctorate in philosophy. She's a reputed scholar of Vedanta and is a senior disciple of Swami Parthasarathi. For the past 3 decades, she's been serving society through Vedanta in a variety of ways. She delivers lectures in weekly classes, retreats, and workshops for the general public. She conducts training sessions for corporate executives like Gopal, who need them, and she writes articles for the Times of India, which is a hobby I share with her. Only she writes for the more profound speaking tree. And she also has a YouTube channel, which is Team Janki Santoke. She has a keen interest in English literature, mythology, Sanskrit, and most important for today, logical thinking. Because the subject of our talk today is clear thinking. My second guest belongs to my previous avatar. When I was running P&G in India, he was my competitor at Hindustan Lever. Not really a direct competitor, but because at the time he was managing director of Brook Bond, but later he became vice chairman of Hindustan Lever. And then one day, he decided to take a 15-minute walk towards Fountain from Churchgate, and he landed at Bombay House. And like the man who came to dinner, he stayed on for 15 years and never took the walk back. We have another thing in common, Gopal and I. Both of us knew zero about business when we began our business life. He had studied physics first, and then he had done electronics at IIT Kharagpur. And I had studied philosophy, economics, and even Sanskrit at Harvard. Our companies, however, were embarrassed when we kind of got to the top, and they decided that we needed to learn something about business. And so they sent us respectively to the advanced management program at the Harvard Business School. So we are both alumni. I didn't know if you know that, Gopal, alumni of the Harvard Business School. Well, today's session is a session on clear thinking. And when an India International Center contacted me, the library of India International Center, I was really quite intrigued by the title of the book, which is How Do You Know What You Know? That's the book. It's unfortunately I marked it in the front. Anyway, this title reminded me of my past when I had taken a class with Quine, the logician, on epistemology. And by the way, Matilal, some of you may know, who are philosophy and Indology students, that he was also in the same class. So when I was asked to speak on this or be chairing of this book, I was delighted. And because I actually had studied Western epistemology, my main interest was ethics. But, I'd taken a course or two. And like Indian epistemology, and epistemology is the science, is the philosophy of knowledge, and exactly on how do we know what we know. And it also has four sources, what Indian epistemology calls the pramanas: perception, reason, memory, and testimony. Anyway, don't get scared. This is not a talk about philosophy. We won't be discussing a priori versus a posteriori knowledge. Janki uh, belongs to the Vedanta tradition, and she's a very practical lady, and the Vedanta tradition itself is very practical. So she is going to talk about how we manage our thoughts and how do we manage our life. So with that, let me hand over to Gopal, who is going to ask Janki some difficult questions. Over to you, Gopal.
Well, thank you very much, Gurcharan. It's a great pleasure. And Janki ji, namaskar. To be on this panel with you and to engage in this discussion. Learning and knowledge creation is a very vast subject. It's called epistemology, as Gurcharan just said. And I wondered why I have been approached to participate in this discussion, because it's not really a great subject of specialization for me, though I have to confess it's a great subject of interest for me. I got interested in the subject because my first two books, which I wrote back in 2007 and 2010, I didn't call it epistemology, but the first one was about human rationality versus human intuition. It was titled The Case of the Bonsai Manager, and Penguin published it. And 3 years later, I was very struck by the different attitudes in Western thinking about self-awareness and Vedantic thinking. And I wrote my second book, which is called When the Penny Drops. So it all came back to me in a flood, now 10 years later, as I was invited to speak here. But I realized that I come from a background of management, which is predicated on, Western ways of thinking about philosophy and psychology and so on and so forth. But Janki ji comes from a very different school, from Vedanta. And I think I will be definitely enriched. I have a feeling everybody here would be enriched by that. And the way we will make sure that we do what Gurcharan has told us, to make sure inadvertently we are not lost in the ethereal spaces of philosophy, is I will pose, and I'm sure the audience will pose, some very pragmatic sort of day-to-day life questions, which Janki ji, because she's very good at that, can answer in a very pragmatic way. So Janki ji, your book is very dense, but it's very wise. And I don't use this in a double-forked way. Very wise books tend to be dense, and it calls upon the reader to devote some time and attention to it, which I'm pleased to say I have done to some extent. And my questions and my comments come from that sort of indulgence with your book. And I have seen this whole world of knowledge, if I call it the knowledge market, as a vast ocean, where you can't see the other end of the banks. And out of the vast ocean, there are only 3 islands which most of us manage to visit. One is the island which I call the explicit knowledge island. And the second is a knowledge island which we call the tacit knowledge island. And the third island I call the misplaced knowledge island. And the rest of it is a large ocean. To us, it's an ocean of ignorance, though it is actually an ocean of knowledge. We can't know everything about many things, and therefore we know a few things about a few things about few fields. Now, when I say explicit knowledge island, I'm referring to things that we know that we know. So I went and studied physics. So they taught me the laws of physics, and I could pass an exam, and I knew something about the laws of physics, and I know that I know the laws of physics to get my degree or whatever. The tacit knowledge island, I call it the intuitive island, is one where we know, but we don't know that we know. So it is deeply rooted somewhere in our brain due to some past experiences. And indeed it is that caused me to write my first book, because I encountered a certain business dilemma which caused me to think about the subject and research it. For example, I've been sitting on many CEO appointments. At the end of the day, after applying all the rationality, going through people's CVs, interviewing them, making reference checks, that last bit is intuitive. You say, I prefer A to B. And if a panel of people agree on that, you choose A or B, and you could still be wrong. So there is a great deal of putting together side by side rationality and intuition. So I call it the intuitive island. The third is a bit dangerous island. It's called the misplaced knowledge island, where the misplaced knowledge island is where we really don't know, but we think we know. It's a very dangerous island, because I'll give you an example. Answering the question, who am I? Most people would say that's pretty straightforward, I can answer it. But it's a really tough question to answer, who am I? So I call it the misplaced knowledge island, and unless you make special efforts to know who you are, you won't know who you are. You could die being a stranger to yourself. So I have these three little islands, which I've given names: explicit knowledge island, the tacit knowledge island, and the misplaced knowledge island. And the rest of it is one vast ocean, which for me is an ocean of my ignorance. This is the way I have seen knowledge and epistemology from a business management perspective, which is where I come from. But Janki ji comes from a different perspective. She comes, as Gurcharan said, from the perspective of four pramanas. Now, I'm not going to explain them, but just to demonstrate that I've read the book, at least I should mention their names. Pratyaksha, which means the senses; Anumana, which means inferences; Upamana, which means a comparison; and Agami, which means authority. Obviously, these will come up in the course of our discussion today. So from this, I have framed three questions. And I'm going to pose the first question to Janki ji. She will answer it in a certain amount of time, 5-7 minutes. And then I'll pose the second and the third question. By that time, the audience questions would have come in, and we will all have a chance to ask questions and Janki ji reply to it. Otherwise, she'll be burdened with the monologue, which I don't think she particularly relishes. So perhaps we can start with my first question to Janki ji. I have used a metaphor of the rational island, or the explicit knowledge island, the intuitive island, and the Maya island, where you think you know what. Can you explain this point about knowledge accretion through the four pramanas, Janki ji?
Yes, certainly. It's a very interesting analysis that you have made of the knowledge, and in fact, the book follows a sort of similar trajectory. What it talks about, first and foremost, is this belief that we have that we know, and we all think we know. The big question in life is always, is this really knowledge, or is this misplaced knowledge? How do we even know? Well, first we have to at least examine this, right? Examine, why do I even think that? There are so many people who think so many things, right? It's simple, like as if we look out, we see the sky, we say the sky is blue. And yet every educated person knows that's not true at all. That's because of the atmosphere and the light coming through it. We say that the sun rises. Not true. In fact, we all know the sun doesn't rise, it is the earth that moves. And centuries after we have learned this, we continue to say that the sun rises. So we are so sure about so many things, and they're not true. Maybe a terrorist is sure that if he goes around killing some people, he gets to go to heaven and God is really happy with him. So many ideas, so many notions. Are they really correct notions? That is something we have to ask ourselves. No, but why do we need to ask ourselves this? What's the problem with having these misplaced notions? Because of a fundamental law of life, which is that our life is designed by our thoughts. So anything that's going wrong in our thoughts is actually manifesting in our life as failure, as frustration, as unhappiness, as not reaching our potential. So we have to locate this misplaced knowledge and junk it. It's like a spring cleaning, like a Diwali cleaning we have to do in our head. And that's where the three pramanas come in. Four pramanas come in. So from your first island, here's where we start with the pramanas. Pramanas means justified ways of thinking. How do you know what you know? So basically, Vedanta says, Indian epistemology says, there are four ways how we know anything. For instance, how do you know right now that there's a lecture on? So because you can hear it, you can see it. So the first way we gain information is through our perceptions. These perceptions are the primary source of knowledge for us. A child will stay ignorant if it is not exposed to a lot of perceptions in its early years. And it's primary. How do we know most things? Is because we see them or hear them or taste them or touch them or feel them. That's how we know. Now, this is a primary source of knowledge, but it is subject to so much misinformation that we must really know what we're doing. Just like we say the sun is rising, the sky is blue. I heard him say that. Imagine all that. You know, when there's a fight and somebody reports the fight, especially the parties themselves involved, you see how different it was. What both parties claim happened. So pratiksha, sense perception, is our first way. So I'm just going to repeat what I have said so far. There are these three islands of knowledge, as Gopalji told us. The first is misplaced knowledge. Now, it's very important that we locate and remove this, because if this is the thing that is making our life work, we are not doing well in this world. No way. People will say all sorts of reasons why we're not doing well, but there's something gone wrong with that knowledge. That's why we're not doing well, or not doing as good as we could possibly do. So how do you know whether you're thinking right or not? We go back to the pramanas. So first pramana is pratiksha. How did you think this thought? Where is it coming from? Did it come from a sense perception? Did we check whether that sense perception was correct? So that's how you use the pramanas to try and figure out where are all these thoughts coming from. So the first one is pratiksha. The second pramana is the pramana of inference, which is a difficult one, because most of us have not trained ourselves in thinking. So even if we've seen the perception correctly, we could jump to any erroneous conclusion out of that. How much interpretation goes on in our mind? But on what basis? Okay, I saw this person was behaving rudely, but now I'm interpreting in my head. What exactly is going on? Am I verifying it? So the whole subject of logic and thinking and all that is our way of verifying whether we reached a right inference. This is rational, this is reasonable, it is logical. But fortunately, it's not the only way available to us. We have another way available to us. It's the third pramana. It's called comparison. In comparison comes things like art, because if mathematics and physics can teach us because they're rational, they're logical, they're so precise in thinking, but mythology can also teach us. but in a completely different way. No rationality, no precision, nothing, just the opposite. But this has to be examined too. Like for instance, we all in Mumbai at least worshipping Ganesha is a big thing. But we don't question why Ganesha? Why does he have such a large head? We don't get it that when we have these rituals, when we have this philosophy, there are some great people who told us some stories to teach us a lesson. And we have to get that lesson straight. Otherwise, we got into all sorts of, the rational people reject it and the superstitious people say, oh, this is so good. No, they're both wrong ways of looking at it. It can't be done this way. It's like Aesop wrote the stories, right? The hare and the tortoise. So you can't think about the hare and the tortoise and say, the rational people say, what kind of silly story is this hare and tortoise? When could they talk like that? Can they have a conversation? Obviously not. Will they ever have a race? Obviously not. So don't give me all this nonsense. This is the rational people talking. The more superstitious, the believers will say things like, no, there was a time where this conversation could have happened. Both are missing the point, which is what Aesop was trying to tell us. Between the hare and the tortoise, the story. The tortoise wins the race, and the only point is that the slow and steady win the race. That's the only point. Now, every other discussion about it is sort of futile. So, to understand what the pramana of comparison tells us, it's such a beautiful thing, especially in India where it's developed so well with all our art and our itihasas and our sculpture, our dancing, all of this. Our temple architecture is teaching us so much, but we're not paying any attention. So we have to learn how to do it through non-rational ways also, because as human beings we have a rationality, we have a rational component, we have this other side, the side of art. And why can't we use both? Of course we should be able to use both. And then we of course realize that no matter how much we think and how much we think correctly, none of us can gain expertise in every subject. It can't be done. So we have to turn to other people to think for us, such as when our stomach is hurting, we go to a doctor. When we have a house to build, we go to an architect. When we have legal documents to write, we'll go to a lawyer. We can't do everything ourselves. So there is the fourth pramana, which is going to authority. Now, this is also dangerous because you have to choose that authority properly. Otherwise, you choose somebody as your authority, that person tells you nonsense, and then off we are on the wrong track again. So, these are the four pramanas. Pratyaksha, which means sense perception. We have to check whether we're doing this correctly. From sense perception, we start thinking. So, the first way is, how did I infer this? What logic have I used? So, I must check that. Is my logic actually working? Then the next way is through comparison. I know something through a comparison. This is like this. So comparison. So I have to have tests to know that these comparisons are right. I'm not going into the test because I'm sure you will have a look at the book sometime. But obviously we can't just do everything. And the fourth way is when we delegate our thinking to somebody else, to somebody who has a superior intellect in that field. So if we do these four things properly, that's what we have the pramanas for. If we do them properly, then we get out of this first island of Gopalji's, which is all this incorrect knowledge that we have collected. And boy, is there so much of it. We have not examined our thoughts at all. So many things we haven't examined in our life. Anything we learned in childhood is right. All traditional beliefs, right. Everything is right for us. No. I mean, I cannot run down tradition. I have spent my life in the tradition itself. I'm not running it down. But everything has to be examined and understood in the right sense. So we have to get off this island, Gopalji's island of misplaced knowledge, and jump onto the island of knowledge, really proper knowledge, which means you've thought it through and this is what you know and this is why you know it and this is how you got this conclusion. If you do this enough, if you think about a topic enough, you really stay with it, you reflect upon it, you digest it. Then from this whole base of correct knowledge that we have, we can jump onto the next knowledge level, which he calls, which refers to intuition. So what really is intuition? Intuition is nothing but digested knowledge. So when you have understood something absolutely, you have spent time over it and it's got into your system. An answer comes to us in a flash, and that flash is always right. That is intuition. But how did it come? It comes out of digested knowledge. Like, for instance, a mother knows about a child because she spent time, energy with that child. So the infant is not saying anything, he's not doing anything, he's just going, yeah, yeah, yeah. But the child, mother knows what's wrong. Is he hungry? Is he sleepy? Has an ant bitten him? She knows what's happening. A doctor sometimes who is extremely skilled at what he's done and very experienced, a lot of thought has gone into his field. He is able to diagnose so well. Hardly have you said a few things to him, he knows what your problem is. So exactly like that, when you have digested knowledge, it's like when you walk in your home at night, you don't bump into things, right? Because that placement of things is very digested in the mind. You walk somewhere else in the dark, of course you'll bump into things. So when we have this digested knowledge, you spend many years with it. Then it comes up so quickly. The answers come up so quickly. That's why we call it intuition. That is why senior people in management and all, they say, okay, I think, though I've seen the resumes of both, I think this is the person, because there's digestive knowledge there. But of course, if you go to the race course and I say, I think this horse is going to win, then I would question whether that was digested knowledge. So these are the pramanas as related to the three islands that you have brought up. Is that okay?
Thank you, Janki. That's very clear and interesting. I just want to sort of reflect on what you said, since your book emphasizes that if you don't reflect, you won't learn. So I'm trying to do the same thing. When I reflect on what you said, I get the feeling that although we human beings, I can talk for myself for sure, think we are very rational based on facts and analytics. And very often in debates, people say, what's the evidence for this? We take the most important decisions in our life intuitively. Whom to marry. If you try doing that rationally, then you're doomed before you started. Whom to stay married to. If you try to keep a checklist and give points on that, then you'll be lost before you know what's happening. I've been, as I said earlier, involved in selecting senior leadership in companies. At the end of all the reference checking and CVs and interviews, as you just described a minute ago, you say, well, I intuitively feel it's that person. I go to see with my wife 10 flats which I want to invest in, one of which I want to invest in. And intuitively, we finally say, no, the one in Juhu facing the sea is the one that I want. I somehow feel it's better than the one in Versova. How come life's most important decisions are taken intuitively and not rationally, while we psych ourselves thinking we are very rational people?
That's very interesting, but we have to take pause between your two islands. The first one of misplaced knowledge, which in Vedanta we refer to as just the mind talking, just any random thing. So we as individuals, every one of us, all us human beings, have this thing going on. We have a mind, we have an intellect. The mind is feeding us with rubbish. Okay, so the first chapter of the book, as you must have seen, is all about that, about how conditioned beliefs are making us do things, how the impulses of the mind are making us do things. And all these things come to us also in a flash. Okay, so some people say, I'm going to marry her because I've fallen in love. Now, this fallen in love, is it intuition that this is the right person for me? Or is it all my conditioning, all my impulses, all my desires, hopes, all these hidden persuaders playing on me? This is the critical thing that we have to know. So yes, you're right that most of our life decisions are made on this non-rational side. The non-rational side itself is made of two components. The earlier one, which is the mind, and the latter one, which is the intuition. The whole trick of life is to know which of these two I'm currently using. So yes, we do take our big decisions like that, and some of them we fall flat on our faces because we did that. Those were not intuition for certain. But the
Thank you.
ones
You make a very important distinction between intuitive knowledge and misplaced knowledge, and that's, I think, very important. Sometimes we mistake one for the other. You can't just say, I want to acquire that company based on some gossip you heard yesterday at the bar in the club. That's misplaced knowledge. But if you've been tracking that company and there's deep-rooted awareness of that company, maybe. But then you're not assured that you're taking the right decision. I mean, intuitive knowledge, when combined with rationality, will probably give you the best possible decisions, but never a perfect decision. Is that correct?
Yes, of course. It is the human condition, right? We are
It is the
not
human.
perfect. We are never going to have everything right. But if we do things right, we'll get most things right most of the time. We will not create I don't know what, that, when that manja gets sort of knotted up when you're flying kites,
Right.
we won't create that out of our life. Okay, we'll do some things well. We won't do some things well. That's fine. I mean, it's part of the human condition to not know everything. How are we going to know everything?
Well, that's
So,
a
but at
very
least we won't
interesting.
create a mess.
Yeah. It's a very
As
pragmatic
I'm
explanation.
listening, can I interrupt for a second?
Of course, of
Gopal
course.
and Janki ji? As I'm listening to you, what's going through my mind is in this discussion that we in India have got a stereotype has been created over the centuries that we were a country, very religious country, which believed in the authority of religious texts, of the Brahmins, and of gods. And actually, what you're bringing out in your discussion is, in fact, that the tradition in India is actually what Amartya Sen called an argumentative tradition. That you get two Indians in a room and you get three ideas, and everybody's talking at the same time. No, but the point here is that the the fundamental thing that I have learned in reading the Sanskrit text, right from the Rig Veda, is an inherent skepticism. Even the Upanishads are questioning, they're doing mental experiments. And the particular one I was thinking of, the verse in the Rig Veda, I mean, this is not exactly related to the question that Gopal has been asking you, but I think it's worth pointing out that this is the Nasadiya verse, which said, well, how was the world created? One person's asking the other person. And the other person says, well, maybe we should ask the gods. Oh, but hang on, the gods came afterwards, the world was created. Well, maybe we should ask the Brahmins. Well, these Brahmins always disagree with each other. So there's no point in getting into an infinite argument. And then they go on like this. And finally, these people both say, well, maybe we don't know how the world was created. Now imagine one of the most sacred texts saying that we don't know. And this, I think, is one of the things I have learned about our tradition. And the whole area of pramanas and the discussion in Nyaya and in Indian epistemology is grounded on the fact of, let's find out what does reason say, and what are the sources. Is it experience? Is the fact that you put your hand on the stove and oh my God, your hand burned. Yes, that is a stove there. So that's the basis of knowledge, which is the knowledge of perception. Anyway,
Yes.
let me get back to you. Sorry I interrupted, but I thought maybe just a little bit of a commercial break might be
No,
worthwhile.
but
So back to you.
the sutra which you mentioned, in fact, goes to say that not only we don't know, he goes on to say the creator doesn't know. He'll ask the creator,
Yeah.
no, creator himself may know or may not know. We don't
Imagine,
know. Yeah.
imagine a creator who doesn't know. You know,
Why was the world created? Yeah. Maybe he knows, maybe he doesn't know. That's where we end the thing. I mean, it's incredible. It's incredible the richness of thought. And it's also incredible that we, as we sit here today, with
yeah,
our
and you
life
know,
and our
actually,
world,
what
we can
I'm
reach
struck by
out to.
also, yeah, what I'm struck by is the playfulness of our tradition, the notion of Leela, that gods are creating the world in play. They're dancing, Shiva is dancing, Krishna is dancing, playing his flute, Ras Leela, and they're creating the universe in the process. And why? For the fun of it. So, I mean, this is a sort of a break from this discussion, but please go ahead. I'm back to you. You were about to.
It is not you did not interrupt. I'm glad that you did because this discussion is based, of course, on Janki ji's book, but it's about the wider aspects of epistemology. And although you mentioned Rig Veda, Gurcharan, you and I have both been to Harvard. You know, the typical style of a Harvard professor is to close the case study, and if you ask him, well, what, he'll say, I don't know the answer to that one. I think we are discussing it, and it's not very different in that sense. They are following a different.
And you know, I mean, I think one thing I'm pleased with is we have finally got an education policy that we can be proud of, a new education policy. And the first and important thing it says is that let's get away from rote learning to learning through critical inquiry, through questioning, through imagination, all the things that you've been, your pramanas, you know, use your imagination, use your intuition, use your rationality, uh, and then move ahead in terms of knowledge, what is learning in school. So hopefully this tradition of inquiry now will come back to our country, and we
Would
won't
be
have to
great.
go abroad to acquire it.
Thank you for that. So really, we are saying curiosity is at the heart of the kernel. And around curiosity comes the four pramanas and a widening. But I want to ask Janki ji to comment on another question. If it is all that sort of structured in that sort of way, why are we not curious about ourselves? You know, I've written a book on why CEOs get fired. After spending 30 years getting good appraisals, they come right up to the top. And I've analyzed 15 cases in my book. And I've come to certain views which are based on management thinking. But I'm very curious to know the Vedantic thinking. And according to, in a nutshell, self-awareness is the one where the bank balance is the lowest.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have found during, now that I'm the number of years that I am, I've found that when I meet somebody who worked for me 30 years ago, he reminds me of an episode which I've completely forgotten, but which left a deep impact on him, positive or negative, by the way, because that's part of leadership. And I want to know, why is self-awareness so difficult? What does Vedanta say about self-awareness? Because knowing yourself is the heart of knowing what you know.
Yeah, I mean, there are multiple reasons. The first, of course, is anything which is always there and very close to you, you can't see it. If I put your photograph, your own photograph, very close to your eyes, and I say, whose photograph is this? You can't tell. So what is close and what is available is unknown. Secondly, look at the nature of our equipments. Our eyes are looking outside. Our ears are hearing outside. Our taste is going to taste whatever comes from outside. So it's almost like the untrained mind is only going to follow what is happening over there. It's not turning its attention within. And the reason it doesn't turn its attention within is obviously two. One is when it's looking outside, it's getting some instant joys. Okay, I'll see a movie, that's good fun. Okay, sit down, analyze yourself. Ab itna kaun karega, you know. So, uh, so firstly, its nature is to look out. Secondly, is it gets instant joys out of doing that. And turning in is effort. That means the joy is going to come later on. Now we say, forget it. Yeah, who is want to waste our time? Let's just see a movie. I mean, that's what we do. Suppose something is bothering us, we listen to music, we try meditation, we do all sorts of things, just escaping the problem, not recognizing the fundamental thing that if I could understand what's going on in my own head, I could reach anywhere in terms of whatever I want. I mean, I achieve whatever it is I want. But let me just understand what's the Achilles heel within me which is preventing me to reach that thing. There's nothing else preventing me. So what within me is not allowing me to express my own potential? To look at that black spot in myself is neither pleasant nor easy. So we live our dwarf lives, unfortunately. Human beings are capable of so much. We can do so much. Even in COVID, some people are doing so much and some people are grumbling, right? So at any point, we can do so much. We can reach so much further. We can feel so much more fulfilled. We can do so much more for everybody else. But we choose, we dwarf, we choose not to look. We choose, in your words, the bonsai way of doing things. So, because the pleasure, instant pleasure, is available outside.
I'm reminded when I listening to you about a famous verse in the Mundaka Upanishad, which is also talking about the same thing, about creating awareness and self-awareness, the consciousness, that this is what makes us different from animals, that we not only are doing, but we also are aware that we are doing. And that and the verse,
and we can improve what we are doing.
Yes, and the verse in the Upanishad says that think of a tree with two birds on the tree. One bird is eating the fruit of the tree, and the other bird is watching the one who is eating the fruit. And the so one is the witness, and we always have in our heads that witness. And that's why people who have a better developed sense of that second bird have got a higher emotional quotient, and they often perform better because they're more aware of themselves, aware of others, and what the needs of others are. And so the second, we can go through life just eating the fruit. But if we are aware that we have two birds inside of us, the one who is also watching, of course, in Vedanta, you go much further and talk about that other bird really being consciousness, and ultimately it is the conscious. It is, I mean, there's another dimension given to it. But I've always found this analogy. I use this both in The Difficulty of Being Good, that book, as well as in The Riddle of Desire, the last book I wrote, to really make us aware of some of the things, some of the basic conflicts that we face in life.
Yeah. I'm just seeing a
Gopal,
message
over
from
to you.
Usha ji that many questions have come, so I don't know if you'd like to have a look.
Yes, I
Yeah,
think that's a
so
good
Gurcharan,
point. This
over
is
to you to handle the questions from the audience.
right. So I think Usha ji will read us the questions, and then I think it will be appropriate probably for Dr. Janki to answer them. Now we can't hear Usha.
You're muted. You need to
You're
unmute.
muted.
Actually, we have received large number of questions. I'm not sure whether we can accommodate all, but we'll try to accommodate as many as possible. The first question which had come is, in a non-spiritual plane, it can happen only in two ways. Access info that becomes your knowledge, or exercise imagination to deduce what exists beyond the known facts. Einstein, for instance, imagination is more important than knowledge. Do you agree?
You know, in different subjects, different people use words differently. So we need to always define our terms before we launch on something. You know, imagination in some cases can be absurd. Like you say, oh, I've fallen in love with this princess and I want to marry her. So it can be absurd. However, imagination as a leap of our intellect into the unknown is obviously way higher than anything else we can do. So yes, in that sense, yes, when the intellect leaps into the unknown, that's the highest human potential. And when the mind goes into the unknown, then we just create that.
So I think what you're saying is it's not either or. It is a moment. I mean, there's a place for literature and there's a place for mathematics. And you don't want to use too much imagination when you're doing 2 plus 2. But when you're talking about love, you can use a lot of imagination. Okay, Ushaji, next question.
Yeah. Does past experiences interfere with the future decision making and judgment process? How to keep it aside?
Yes, most definitely. But the deal is that all knowledge is from the past, right? So we have to make this judgment in our own head as to which of the past experiences I need to use in this and which I don't. To use the technical and the easy way of talking it, really, if you ask me, Vedanta differentiates between mind and intellect. So our mind goes into the past and interrupts our progress to the future. The intellect goes into the past and learns something to hasten our project into the future. So when we use our past experiences as a burden on us, like Mark Twain has said that, he said that a cat having sat on a hot stove will never sit on a hot stove again, but then she will never sit on a cold one either. So when we
Let
use
me
our
also suggest an interesting point of view on the same subject. Marcel Proust, the great French novelist, you know, he built his whole novel based on memory, and he concludes that actually we when we think about our past and our memories, we invent, and very often the memory of an event is superior to the event itself. And so there's a lot of truths. Now, we're not looking, you know, 5 people remember the same event and they'll give you 5 different stories. That's called the Rashomon effect, that famous movie of Kurosawa called Rashomon. And 5 people tell the story. It's the same event and they've told 5 stories. But what he's saying is actually the human imagination, our memory, creates something which is actually superior to what may have actually happened. Anyway, let's go to the next question.
Okay. Actually, there are 2 people who have asked the same question. What is knowing?
Knowing is what is done in our thoughts. When our thought perceives an object without the object actually being there. In other words, it is the perception of the object without the object. That's a thought. So all our knowledge is nothing but a thought. And a thought is, I mean, as distinguished from a sensory experience, is the perception of the object without the object. So all knowledge comes in that. All knowledge is in thoughts, and this is the definition of a thought.
The next question. we are ignorant person means we are blissful. We are above what we know. How do we know? In other words, we are Shiva, Shivo Aham. Do you think Vedantic philosophy and thought affirm this statement? Looking forward to hear from you.
Uh, I in some ways, I'm sorry, I answered everything in some ways. So as long as we are in ignorance, this is the state of tamas. In tamas, we are very happy with life. It's like I have an ailment and I don't know I have that ailment. I'm very happy with life, no problem. Then I get to know about that ailment, so I'm very upset and agitated. So this is the state of rajas. So rajasic people are always upset and agitated. They're going up and down like a popcorn on a hot tawa because they've understood something that the tamasic guys have not understood. And then this should all lead us to the state of sattva, where we are able to deal with whatever the situation is in some kind of balanced manner. And when we do all of this properly across our material as well as our spiritual life, we reach the ultimate of human perfection, which is then when we come to Shivoham. So Shivoham is the absolute opposite of the bliss of ignorance. It is the bliss of complete knowledge.
Okay. Next question is, what are the levels of awareness?
Sorry?
Levels of
awareness.
What are the levels of awareness?
I guess you can classify it in any of the ways we have done so far. Tamas, Rajas, Sattva is a good way. Tamas is the lowest form of awareness. Tamas literally means darkness. It's so dark, you can't really see anything. You don't feel anything, you don't think anything. It's all duh. It doesn't work. Then Rajas, you start becoming aware. You start becoming aware of your duties. You start becoming aware of your responsibilities. And that's a huge burden on us. My God, I've got to go to work. Good God, it's Monday morning. I have so many things to do. This is the state of Rajas. Sattva, as your knowledge develops and you become wise, mature, balanced, poised, the light of knowledge starts shining through. Then we come to a stage where we know and we're able to deal with things. And then eventually, if you cross even that, you come to the state, the highest state of knowledge, which is enlightenment, self-realization, moksha, whatever you want to call it.
Okay.
What I want to make, since you talked about these three, tamas, rajas, and sattvic, that there's an aspect of sattva that interests me a lot, which is the idea of alertness. That I find that so much of our lives, we become creatures of habit. And habit tends to make us dull. Habit, whereas I prize the notion of alertness. And alertness is something that you are sensitive to the moment of what's happening. And you're not you're not conditioned to do this sort of same thing in a routine. The routinized life, I think, is the enemy of sattva. Anyway, that's another thought. Please go ahead. Next question.
You're muted.
Most of us understand about self at intellectual level, but find it difficult to be equanimous practically. How do we address this?
What gets agitated in us is our mind. When we strengthen our intellect, then this intellect is able to hold the mind. But what has happened to all of us, all human beings across the board today, is we function so much on our mind that the mind has become like this major Dara Singh, the Muhammad Ali. You can't handle him anymore. And the intellect, we have starved the intellect. We have done nothing to it. We have not made it grow. We have put it down, in fact, in our lives. So now when the trouble starts, the intellect which could have saved us is not able to. The mind goes berserk and the intellect is not able to hold this. So before we get into any problems in life, we must develop our intellect, develop our capacity to think. And that comes through the study and reflection on the knowledge of Vedanta. As you think about it and you understand about life and you digest those ideas, peace becomes sort of automatic. It's not something you're working on, but generally peaceful, not generally jumping up and down all the time. I mean, nothing wrong in being excited and happy about life, but not so much that we lose our mental balance because of it. So, how do we convert from theoretical knowledge to actually being able to control the mind is through digestion, through reflection. The more you think about the knowledge, the more it becomes us.
Next question.
Yeah. How do we cope up with challenges when customers, particularly in health sector, do not want to meet us? As I am in biotech selling, as doctors and hospitals are burdened with webinars, WhatsApp calls, in such scenario, how do we communicate with them?
Interesting. So you've taken the first step
There's
in
a
answering the
practical one.
question. Yes, you've taken the first step, which is understood what the situation is. You have to tell something to somebody who doesn't want to listen to what you have to say. So you've got that. So now this is where the intellect comes in. Now don't try doing that over and over again. The definition of insanity is to repeat the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. So this is not the time where we can talk to them. So you have to go to other alternatives. What is it that we can do now? They are on webinars all the time. Why don't you organize a webinar for them to be on? So this is where our intellect comes in to look at that situation and come up with a million options of what we can do. And we all can do that. And that's the greatness of Vedanta. It doesn't go into telling us
Also what
what to
marketing is
do.
all about.
Yeah, it
It's
goes in.
also what marketing is all about. Gopal will
Yeah,
tell us.
yeah.
Okay. Usha, next question.
Yeah, how do I know that I have been able to identify all my misplaced knowledge and remove those?
How sweet. We will never know that. They will always keep popping up. It's just like cleaning a room. As you clean it, you will see more dirt. You will see subtler dirt. See, if the whole room was like a go down and stuff was thrown in, you say, oh my God, it's so dirty. And you take out stuff. Then you say, now it's clean. But now that it's clean, you'll see some more. Then you'll see some more. That's life. And as we go to subtler and subtler forms of dirt, the greater and greater potential in us keeps coming forth.
May I add a little point here to what Janki ji said? It may be unwise to classify misplaced knowledge as undesirable, rational knowledge is highly desirable, and intuitive knowledge as inevitable. Those are the wrong sort of classifications. Knowledge becomes misplaced because circumstances change. Socialism was good at a point of time, but it's no more good. And so it has become misplaced knowledge. So I would just caution that science has progressed because certain accepted views of the world that the sun goes around the earth was challenged by Galileo. But for him, we would still be under the misplaced knowledge of using the words that Janki ji used. Sun rises in the east and sets in the west. So I just wanted to add a little bit of flourish to that misplaced knowledge is at the heart of curiosity. But excess of misplaced knowledge is very dangerous. That's the point I think Janki ji is trying to make.
Yeah. Well, I think curiosity is a very, 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 very important. That in fact, a lot of the classical texts, ancient texts, do use the example of the child who has infinite curiosity, and that we should try to emulate that child. And in the process, the child also has a lot of fun. And so the process of learning and knowledge is also about having some fun. And I think living in a certain way where you retain curiosity and you have fun going through life, there's a lot to be said for that. So I think we have come to the end, Ushaji, and
We have,
are there a huge deluge of questions?
oh
that we
yeah,
have
there
to
is a
get
lot of still 17 questions.
Oh God.
Quickly
Well, I
run this
think
one from all the way from Singapore, and he has said that given the dynamic and fluid nature of epistemology and the tentative nature of knowledge acquisition, are we not at any given point only asking, why do you think you know what you know?
Yes,
okay.
that is true.
That's the
Yes.
heart of the whole thing. So it's a good question to end on. And it's also, I think, in terms of good India-Singapore relationship, it's a good way to diplomatically end this session. So come, Janki ji. This is very good. This is the heart of your whole talk.
Yes, this is the whole problem with knowledge, that some people who start with knowledge seem to end with knowledge. But the point of knowledge is always as a direction to action. If we don't use our knowledge as a direction to action, we end up becoming intellectual centipedes. We don't end up achieving anything. So if you just keep on analyzing, it becomes analysis paralysis. So yes, we must understand, we must correct, and we must act. That's the biggest thing, that all this knowledge has to eventually lead us to performing the right action. That's the message of the Gita, right? Karmanyavadhikaraste. Your adhikar is only karma. Is your adhikar, your right, is only action. So all this work we have done, it's like an iceberg. All this work we have done only to get to the final, what according to me now is the right action. So if we do it like that, then we don't get into this situation.
And this is a good point to end on, because it says something about our country, our biases, and we are our Brahminical tradition, that we are a country that values thought still, and that's good, but we value it sometimes more than action. And in my company, it was a multinational company, and there was one manager who had worked in India, an international manager, and who had come to the conclusion that if you wanted to kill a project, you put two Indians on the team, and they would argue the project to death, and it would never be acted upon. So it's a cautionary tale about action. Ultimately, that's why I've always thought, that the word management guru stands for good at understanding, but relatively useless. Unless that fellow acts on it, you better be aware of his limitations. Anyway, it's a good point to end this enjoyable discussion. Thank you very much, Dr. Janki Santoke. Thank you very much, Gopal. And thank you very much, Ushaji. And thank you all
Thank
for
you.
attending.
May I say one thing in the end, please? Thank you so
please.
much for inviting me, and thank you to my panelists for making such an interesting discussion, and to you, Ushaji. For all those who are listening, in case you would like to pursue the study of Vedanta, we have online classes, and we would be delighted if you would be joining us. The details are on the website. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all.
They can just Google your name and they'll get all the data, right? The website and so on. Okay. All right,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye.